The multi-purpose Sibley Hall was opened in 1964, and Hayward's End, which has two entirely different aspects, was acquired in 1982 and is now used as a girls' hall of residence.
A Methodist chapel was built close to the school in 1911 to replace the old iron building in Regent Street, and the school shared its use. The tower and spire were added 10 years later in memory of old boys who had given their lives during the First World War, and this survived the fire which destroyed the chapel in 1939. Stone from the redundant St. Peter's Church in Froster was used for the rebuilding in the 1950s, and the roof timbers were once part of the Sea View Pier on the Isle of Wight. Much of the construction work was done by pupils of the school, working under professional supervision. Until 1928, a girls' boarding school was run by Mrs. Kimmins in Ryford Hall. It was then bought for use as Wycliffe Junior School, and in 1935 it was linked to the senior school by a bridge over the main road.
The National Endowed Mixed School was built in 1832. It was subsequently extended and served the village until 1985, when the new Park Junior School was opened. The old buildings fell into decline, but we were pleased to be present when the rehung school bell was rung for the first time by the old caretaker, Jack Wright, to celebrate their refurbishment. A few weeks later, we looked in at the new junior school, which is just across the road, and found some of the pupils rehearsing for an end-of-term concert. This coincided with the retirement of a popular member of staff. That's why his name is on the back cloth.
Till at last he found the grain of corn, which he lifted up for all to see, and which he planted in the ground. And it was from that single seed that all the crops which feed the human race are grown.
Pupils at the nearby infant school had made this splendid collage as part of a project about King Arthur. We persuaded some of the children to show us a couple of traditional circle dances, and then later they were allowed on the climbing frame. The county secondary school was later renamed Maidenhill Mixed Comprehensive School, and there we met two girls who were working on one of their own designs of stone sculpture, which we hope will soon be found in prominent locations in the town.
You have the big ones, I'll have the small ones.
The canal builders used mostly imported labour, gangs of navvies who built the navigations as they were called, and bricks for the canal locks were made on the site. But then a roadway was cut through the railway embankment to give access for the Stonehouse Brick and Tile Company, established in 1890 on the east side of the Great Western Railway Station. The raw material for the bricks was clay, cut from the flank of nearby Doverow Hill, and at one time the exposed yellow cliff could be seen from the Forest of Dean, 40 miles away. At its peak, the factory was producing 6,000 high-quality bricks an hour, but competition forced the closure of the works in 1968, and nothing whatever remains of the great enterprise, although the cliff face looms over the houses which now occupy the site. But we did come across what may be the only surviving example of this little figure, manufactured by the firm in its heyday for publicity purposes.
Stonehouse has always jealously guarded its open spaces. Doverow Hill Wood was given to the people in 1880 by members of the Hayward family in memory of Mrs. Mary Hayward, and it is now managed by a small charitable trust.
Since the last war, the village of Stonehouse has become a town. Thanks to the generosity of the Women's Institute, a town sign was erected in 1984, and it hangs in the frame of an old inn sign from neighbouring Leonard Stanley. The emblem of the Tudor rose is repeated in the handsome chain of office given to the chairman of the local council by Mr. Robotham in 1978. This factory was built behind Avenue Terrace during the last war for the Hoffman Ball Bearing Company, and, as we've already heard, Sperry Gyroscope set up in Bond's Mill at the same time, creating thousands of new jobs in what had been a quiet rural village. We talked to Mr. Jack Anderson, who has lived in Stonehouse all his life.
Well, it's 80 years since I was born here, so one would expect to have seen a lot of changes, but the largest change certainly was during the time of the Second World War because of the coming of these big factories. And afterwards it seemed that the sites of old mills have been in demand and have been very useful in providing employment. It's difficult for people to realise in these days that there were green fields on the estates which were known as Woodcock Lane, the Burney Fields, the Park, Rylands Road, Bridgend and Little Australia, and Rosedale of course stands on the site of the old brickworks. Now, all those places are within a short walk of green fields, and so in many ways Stonehouse has the best of both worlds. The greens that have been saved, and particularly the willow tree green, would probably look familiar to George Whitfield if he came back, and it's thanks to the efforts of the first parish council that so much of those greens has been maintained. Now, in my view, Stonehouse has grown enough. It'll be difficult to maintain it on its present size, but I'm sure that folk will be found who will be willing to fight to preserve it within its existing boundaries.
A large area of land within the parish boundary, with ready access to the M5 motorway, is already being developed for industries which need easy access to their markets. But we hope that the many charming features of this old village, some of which we discovered during the making of this little film, will be preserved to be enjoyed by generations to come. We owe thanks to many people who have helped us, but especially Mr. Anderson, who has given us access to his unpublished history of Stonehouse, as well as the opportunity to use a number of photographs from his extensive collection. We have enjoyed making our journey of discovery in and around the town, and we ask to be forgiven if we have made mistakes, or for not making reference to many important buildings, organisations and personalities, but it proved impossible to include them all. But we have tried to capture something of the spirit of this historic town, and we would like to think that we may have stirred a few memories amongst those who know Stonehouse better than we ever shall.